like to now open the floor to comments and questions, and don't be hesitant to make an informed comment. You won't be locked into having to ask a crisp question. There's a lot of experts in the room here today. Dr. Burrows?
John Burrows, Lawyers Committee on Nuclear Policy. Last fall at the General Assembly, Brian D'Agostino, the Director of the National Nuclear Security Administration of the United States, gave a talk in which he discussed research into verification technologies being undertaken by Sandia National Laboratories. And this subsequently was in communication with Mr. D'Agostino and others about this. And Sandia says they're doing this work in pursuance of the commitment made in the U.S. National Nuclear Posture Review on research and development regarding achievement of nuclear weapons-free worlds, including verification technologies. And so it appears they're investigating a number of different technology techniques for verification, some of which, or maybe all of which, were mentioned by Mr. Ralph. And so first of all, I just want to let people know about that, and I do have some information I received from Mr. D'Agostino. But secondly, if Frank or Tariq have, or anybody else have any comments on, your assessment of the work the U.S. is currently doing in this area, I'd certainly be interested.
I could be very short. There's not as much as I wish there were being done, and I'd be very interested in learning from you what is being done in Sandia. But it was in the Nuclear Posture Review, but I haven't seen that much work being done.
Please.
This is not to follow up on John's question. This is another question, a comment actually. My name is Rob Van Riet. I work with Alan for Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament, PNND. And I would just like to pick up on what you said, Jonathan. PNND is a program of Global Security Institute. And you mentioned how important it is that some of the things that we discuss here today go outside these walls and make sure that parliamentarians are aware of some of the programs that have been mentioned. And I would just like to mention that PNND has been commissioned by the Interparliamentary Union to produce a handbook highlighting parliamentary measures to support nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. And Alan and I started working on the handbook a couple of months ago. We've now produced a draft, and in this draft we look at a wide array of areas where parliamentarians can undertake action to improve nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament, including the CTBTO verification regime. We include that in the handbook, and we circulated a draft during the last IPU assembly in Uganda, Kampala, a couple of weeks ago. And it's a very informative tool because a lot of parliamentarians are not aware of how good the system works. And we discussed and we joked a little bit about how good it works. But it's really a wonderful tool to point at for its inclusiveness and its also its global nature. We also highlight, for example, the UK-Norway initiative and a number of other, what we would like to call exemplary initiatives that have already been undertaken. And we would like to inspire legislators to take similar initiatives forward in their respective legislators or in a regional context. And I would just like to mention that we would also be actually very interested in including some of the recommendations that Dr. Van Hippel made with regard to fissile materials. We already have a chapter on it. But I think that some of the recommendations that you mentioned might actually be included. I think it would benefit the overall text. And just so people in the room know, we will launch the publication in October in Quebec during the next IPU assembly. But if you do want to know more about it. If you do want a copy of the draft text, just come to me after this session and I can give it to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have a few questions of the panelists. Dr. Van Hippel, could you comment on the President of the United States has gathered over 40 heads of state, and he has a program to safeguard fissile materials. Could you comment on the effectiveness of that program and how it might be improved?
That's the Nuclear Materials Summit, which the President Obama initiated in 2010, and it was just a second summit in Seoul in March. It's a good initiative as far as it goes. It really is primarily focused on the research reactor area and just a part of the research reactor universe. And so I do think, as I indicated in my talk, it would be important to broaden this. Unfortunately, powerful forces object to broadening it, certainly into the nuclear propulsion reactor area. The U.S. Navy would very strongly object. And into the civilian plutonium area, I think France would be the leading country to object, but others would as well. And so it's constrained by, it's a coalition of the willing. And even in that area, Russia has basically been cooperating in converting reactors that the Soviet Union supplied to other countries, but has not yet given priority to converting research reactors within Russia itself. And so that's another area. And in fact, at Seoul, the U.S. had persuaded Russia to do feasibility studies on converting 6 of its 50 or more reactors, highly enriched uranium fueled reactors, to low enriched uranium, and the feasibility studies concluded that they could be converted with these 6 reactors. And it was expected that Russia would announce at the Seoul summit that they would be converted, but in fact Russia didn't make that announcement.
So the public announcement that we're going to safeguard all nuclear materials really doesn't cover the actuality of what's being put into practice.
Well, as I mentioned, there's about 2,000 tons of materials. Maybe half of that of fissile materials. About half of that may be in the weapons complexes, and then the other half is there is half of the plutonium in the civilian complexes. There's varying levels of security. Security isn't really, there's no definition of security that is to be achieved at the end of this 4-year effort. And so I think it's fair to say that research reactors at universities and such institutions are more vulnerable than fissile material at very heavily guarded government facilities. So it's fair to give that initial priority, but in fact, no fissile material is absolutely secure. I mean, only by eliminating the material do you really solve the security problem. And so I think there should be more of a, there's lots more that could be done.
I would add that the goal that President Obama outlined in Washington in March 2010 was to secure all vulnerable fissile materials, not necessarily all nuclear material. And as Frank mentioned, as part of that, the goal was to repatriate back to the original supplier HEU that was used in civilian uses and to convert existing reactors for that. One thing that needs to be done is that if vulnerable nuclear material is the objective, securing it is the objective, then it should not matter as to which country such material exists and whether it is friend or foe. And in both the two summits, this is my private comment, some countries that do have fissile materials were not were not invited to the summit. Also, there is resentment among many other countries which were not invited to the summit that the communiques and the action plans that were agreed in the two respective summits, these countries feel are being shoved down their throats, and since they were not invited, they don't feel that they have sufficient buy-in. A point also made by Frank that I'd like to elaborate further, that only 10% or less than 10% of the world's HEU is in civil use, 90% is in military use. So again, if HEU is the issue, then we should focus not only on the civilian component, but also on the military component. Otherwise, we are just perpetuating the system where civil materials are targeted and they should be properly protected. The IAEA has set out the amendment to the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material. The Rev 5 is now available. That divides or it categorizes nuclear material in 3 categories, and it elaborates very specifically the respective security measures that should be implemented by the states. And the security of nuclear material is essentially the responsibility of the state itself. It's a national responsibility that cannot be transferred to any other entity. So again, one needs to focus on the security of all nuclear materials, and focus not only on the security, but also on the drawdown and elimination and conversion.
Thank you. That's a good note to end on, and to re-emphasize the fact that a global universal regime that hasn't even formally entered into force has demonstrated that such a regime can be effective, that Tibor didn't even highlight the collateral benefits that the CTBTO has demonstrated in monitoring earthquakes, tsunamis, and most recently a catastrophe at a nuclear facility. But it comes back to a question of political will. And I was just thinking what would happen if a country decided in the realm of banking that it would decide that it would be optional as to whether letters of credit would be honored in their country. That this sort of pulling out of the global financial system would be considered absurd, and nobody would do it. But it's time that we started seeing that our common interests in a safe and sustainable future require the same levels of cooperation and legal norms in security, in the elimination of nuclear weapons that we're seeing in the financial sector. Thank you very much.